So picture this. It is late 1974. The temperature up at the high-altitude terrain of the Colorado Rockies is, well, it's sitting way below freezing.
Oh, absolutely bitterly cold.
Right. The snow is thick, the air is thin, and winding through those really isolated, treacherous mountain passes is a tan 1968 Volkswagen Beetle.
Just a completely mundane sight for the era.
Exactly. I mean, to the outside world, to anyone who might just casually pass this vehicle on a dark stretch of highway, the driver is just a diligent, maybe slightly eccentric law student.
Using his winter break from the University of Utah to hit the ski slopes, right?
Yeah, and he looks the part. He wears the right clothes, he has the right demeanor. But in reality, that car has been meticulously modified into a rolling confinement chamber, and the driver is actively hunting.
It's a really stark image, and it perfectly captures the duality we are going to dissect today, because we are looking at a period that represents a truly critical juncture in the history of American serial homicide.
Yeah, this is really the peak of his terror.
It is the absolute peak of this killer's organized phase. And, when we use that term in behavioral profiling, organized offender, we are talking about someone who is highly methodical.
They plan everything out.
Right. They plan meticulously. They target strangers. They transport victims from an abduction site to a secondary disposal site. And crucially, they maintain a completely normal social facade.
Which is the scariest part, honestly.
It is. And he was able to operate with this surgical precision in these high-altitude environments because of a severe lack of interjurisdictional police cooperation back in the 1970s.
Yeah, the systems we have today just weren't there.
Exactly. The digital databases, the rapid communication networks we rely on, they simply did not exist. He recognized that structural blind spot and, well, he exploited it flawlessly.
And that is exactly our roadmap for today's deep dive. We're taking a massive stack of forensic reconstructions, behavioral profiles, crime scene reports, and autopsy details.
All focusing squarely on early 1975.
Yes, his early 1975 Colorado spree. We are going to chronologically trace the attacks on Karen Eileen Campbell, Julie Lyle Cunningham, and Denise Lynn Oliverson.
We'll really get into the weeds of the modus operandi.
Right, the MO, the highly specific postmortem rituals,
Mm-hmm.
and the timeline of how he operated before, during, and after the violence.
And right at the outset, I think it's vital to establish the clinical parameters of this discussion. We are analyzing the mechanics of an apex predator.
We really are.
So to understand the forensic history and how profiling evolved, we simply cannot sanitize the methodology.
No, we can't. So consider this your warning. If you're listening to this, we will not censor the graphic realities of these crimes.
It's going to get dark.
Very. We are dealing with extreme blunt force trauma, sexual desecration, necrophilia, and just the grim logistical realities of forensic recovery. We are looking directly at the pathology.
Because understanding how these systems failed requires looking closely at what the offender actually did.
Exactly. So prepare yourself for a highly analytical, unfiltered look at this case.
To truly grasp the 1975 spree, we first have to understand the geography.
Yeah.
And really, the strategic shift that occurred in the before phase.
Right, the setup.
Yeah. In September of 1974, he moved from Washington State to the Avenues neighborhood in Salt Lake City, Utah, to attend law school at the University of Utah.
Which seems like a fresh start on paper.
It does. But his predatory focus didn't remain localized to Salt Lake City. Almost immediately, his hunting grounds began to drift eastward, deep into the ski corridors of Colorado.
Places like Snowmass and Vail.
Exactly.
And looking at the map, moving to Colorado feels like a very deliberate attempt to, hit the reset button.
Huh.
He knows the heat is turning up in the Pacific Northwest.
Oh, absolutely. Law enforcement in Washington and Oregon were starting to connect the dots on a string of missing young women.
Right. They had a physical description, they had the name Ted, and they were actively looking for a tan Volkswagen Beetle.
The walls were closing in.
So by crossing state lines and pushing into the Rockies, he is essentially erasing his own wanted poster. I mean, he is walking into a jurisdiction where nobody knows his face, his name, or his car.
That is a highly accurate assessment. It was a tactical evasion strategy.
Yeah.
And the systems of the mid-1970s made this incredibly effective.
The silos. Yeah.
Yes, the silers. If a police department in King County, Washington wanted to share information with a sheriff in Pitkin County, Colorado, they couldn't just upload a file to an actual database.
They couldn't just send an email.
No, they relied on physical teletypes, mailed bulletins, or direct phone calls. And that usually only happened if an investigator had a specific reason to suspect a cross-state connection.
Which they didn't.
Right. Without that suspicion, police departments function in absolute silos. He was banking on those silos.
And the environments he is choosing are fascinating from a psychological standpoint. He isn't stalking people in dark alleyways in major metropolitan areas.
No, he is specifically targeting premier resort towns.
Right. And if you've ever spent time in a ski town in the middle of winter, you know the exact atmosphere. It is relaxed. Everyone is on vacation.
There is an incredibly high degree of social trust.
Exactly. You constantly see young, independent women walking alone, like heading from a chalet down to a hotel lounge or walking from a ski lift back to their apartment.
He is weaponizing that atmosphere of leisure and safety. It acts as an environmental camouflage for his predation.
Because everyone is just there to have a good time.
Exactly. The transient nature of a resort town is perfect for an organized offender. People are constantly coming and going, checking in, checking out.
So a strange face doesn't mean anything.
Right. A strange face in a hotel lobby doesn't trigger any alarms because everyone is a stranger.
No.
But this geographic shift to Colorado wasn't just about finding new hunting grounds.
It was an escalation.
A major escalation in his methodology. He is starting to incorporate vast distances and highly complex remote disposal methods.
And to do that, to execute that kind of mobile predation, he needed a very specific piece of equipment,
the vehicle.
which is the perfect entry point to discuss the car itself. The tan 1968 Volkswagen Beetle.
It's so iconic now for all the wrong reasons.
It really is. Today, we look at a vintage VW Bug, and it seems quirky, almost cartoonishly harmless.
Like a toy.
Yeah, exactly. But when you read through the forensic analysis and the police inventory photos from these sources, you realize this specific vehicle was heavily and intentionally engineered.
It was not just a getaway car.
No, it's a rolling trap.
The modifications to the Beetle are just a masterclass in organized predatory behavior. He didn't just use the vehicle to transport himself. He physically altered the interior to create a concealed space for abduction.
And the most glaring one is the seat, right?
Yes. The complete removal of the front passenger seat.
I want to make sure we clearly visualize this because it's so freaky.
Yeah.
If you unbolt and remove the front passenger seat of a classic VW Beetle, you are left with a surprisingly large, flat expanse of metal floorboard.
Just a void in the car.
Right. And why go through the trouble of doing that? Because it allowed him to force his victims to lie completely flat on the floor of the car.
Out of sight.
Completely.
Yeah.
If you are driving on a mountain pass or even just stopped at a red light next to this Beetle and you casually glance over, what do you see?
You just see a guy driving alone.
Exactly. The victim is entirely beneath the window line, totally invisible to the outside world.
Furthermore, the engineering of the trap went beyond just visual concealment. He also physically removed the inside door handle on the passenger side panel.
God, that is the detail that always stops me cold.
It's terrifying.
Just imagine the psychological terror of that moment. A victim is lured or forced into this vehicle, the heavy metal door shuts, and suddenly the reality of the situation snaps into focus.
Panic sets in.
Total panic. Instinct takes over. You reach for the door handle to throw it open and roll out, and your hand just hits a smooth metal panel.
There is nothing to grab.
Nothing. The mechanism of escape has been surgically removed. Once that door clicks shut, you are sealed inside a mobile vault.
And stationed directly behind the driver's seat, easily within his arm's reach, police photos documented what investigators termed a murder kit.
Just sitting right there.
Just sitting there. This was not a random assortment of tools you might find in an average trunk. It was a curated, highly specific inventory designed for intimidation, physical control, violence, and forensic concealment.
Let's break down exactly what was in this kit, because the inventory reads like a map of his methodology.
It really outlines his entire process.
Right. So he had handcuffs and rope, which are standard for restraint and immobilization. He had a crowbar and a tire iron,
which were his primary tools of force.
Yeah, the autopsy reports consistently point to these specific tools as his primary weapons for surprise bludgeoning. His goal wasn't a drawn-out physical struggle.
No, he wanted to end the struggle before it began.
Exactly. He utilized immense kinetic force to incapacitate his targets instantly. He also carried a flashlight, which is obviously essential for nocturnal navigation in the unlit wilderness.
And the ice pick.
Yes, the ice pick. Which is particularly chilling because it isn't an effective primary weapon for instant incapacitation.
No, it's not a bludgeon.
It is a tool for close quarters, psychological terror, and compliance.
The kit also contained large, heavy-duty green garbage bags.
For the bodies.
Yes, these were utilized to conceal bodies during transport or to bag up bloody clothing and incriminating forensic evidence.
And he had masks too, right?
He did. He carried specialized masks to conceal his identity during the initial strike. He had a standard knit ski mask, which frankly wouldn't draw a second glance in a Colorado ski town in the dead of winter.
Everyone wears those.
Right.
But he also carried a mask he had personally crafted from pantyhose with eye holes cut out.
Which is just straight out of a horror movie.
It is a classic tool for night stalking and psychological intimidation.
Okay, looking at all of this, there's a massive cognitive dissonance that we need to address here.
The double life.
Exactly. How does a University of Utah law student maintain this double life? How do you sit in a torts lecture, participate in study groups, chat with your professors, and then walk out to the campus parking lot where your car has a missing passenger seat and a literal bag of murder weapons stashed behind the driver's seat?
It defies logic.
It really does.
Yeah.
How does he function without someone noticing this massive red flag?
Well, it speaks to a terrifying capacity for psychological compartmentalization. He was able to build a flawless firewall between his public persona, the articulate, charming, politically active, aspiring lawyer, and his core pathology.
But what about the physical evidence of the car? People had to have seen it.
You have to place yourself in the context of the 1970s. Society was simply not as hypervigilant as we are today. We didn't have a cultural awareness of serial killers.
True, the term didn't even really exist in the public consciousness yet.
Exactly. So if a peer or a neighbor happened to ask, "Hey, Ted, why is your passenger seat missing?" He was a master manipulator.
You just have an excuse ready to go.
A perfectly plausible excuse. "Oh, I'm moving some large boxes this weekend," or "I needed the space to haul firewood."
And people would just buy it.
Because why wouldn't they? A psychopath of his caliber is incredibly adept at using mundane, charming lies to neutralize suspicion. Moreover, he utilized the natural structure of his academic calendar.
Oh, like winter breaks and stuff.
Right, long holiday weekends, winter breaks. He used those to conduct his scouting and hunting trips. His normal life provided the perfect alibi for his absences.
Is the ultimate camouflage. He is hiding a predator inside the shell of an upwardly mobile professional.
The patience involved in maintaining that facade is staggering.
It is, which sets the stage for his first definitive strike in this 1975 Colorado sequence. We are moving to mid-January.
To Snowmass.
Yeah. The location is Snowmass Village, an elite ski resort area in Pitkin County.
Right. In January of 1975, Karen Eileen Campbell, a 23-year-old registered nurse from Michigan, was vacationing at the Wildwood Inn in Snowmass with her fiancé and his family.
And the Wildwood Inn was exactly the type of environment we discussed earlier. Luxurious, busy, heavily populated with tourists, and perceived as entirely safe.
A soft target environment.
Exactly. The investigative reports showed that the killer had actually arrived in the Snowmass area several days before the abduction.
Under the guise of a ski trip.
Right. He was supposedly utilizing his winter break from law school to do some skiing. But the reality is that he was scouting.
Learning the layout.
He spent days learning the layout of the Wildwood Inn. He was sitting in the lobbies, observing the transient flow of the guests, mapping out the blind spots, the exits, and the natural rhythms of the hotel.
He wasn't rushing.
Not at all. He was waiting for the exact perfect confluence of physical isolation and target vulnerability.
And that precise moment of vulnerability presented itself on the evening of January 12th. Though I should note, some original investigative teletypes document the date as January 15th.
The exact day is a little fuzzy in the early reports, yeah.
Right. But Karen Campbell had spent the evening in the hotel's lounge with her fiancé. At a certain point, she decided she wanted to read, so she left the lounge to head up to her second-floor room to grab a magazine.
It is such an incredibly ordinary, mundane decision.
We've all done it 100 times.
I'm just going to run up to the room for a second. She leaves the warmth and noise of the lounge. She walks out into the hallway toward the elevator.
The distance was incredibly short.
Yeah, the architectural blueprints in the source material show that the distance from the lounge to her room was only a few dozen feet. We are talking about a few dozen feet of brightly lit, carpeted indoor hotel hallway.
And she never makes it.
She vanishes.
She vanished within that microscopic window of time and space. The interception was incredibly swift and silent, likely involving a rapid physical overpowering.
Or drawing a weapon, like the ice pick, to force her to be quiet.
Exactly. Immediate brandishing of a weapon to ensure compliance, rushing her out a side exit and into the waiting beetle.
Nobody saw a thing.
For over a month, Her disappearance was a total mystery. It wasn't until February 17th, 1975, that a passerby made a horrific discovery.
Out on a dirt road.
On a secluded dirt road approximately 3 miles away from the resort.
The geographical contrast here is deeply unsettling. You have the Wildwood Inn, which represents ultimate comfort, warmth, and safety. And just a 3-mile drive away, down a desolate, unlit dirt road, you have the brutal, freezing isolation where she was ultimately taken.
It's a jarring shift in environment.
Her body was deposited in a snowbank. And because it was February in the high-altitude Rockies, the sub-zero temperatures acted as a natural freezer. Her remains were partially preserved.
Which is a grim reality, but forensically crucial.
Right. Structurally, that cold preservation locked in the forensic evidence of the extreme violence that was inflicted upon her.
The autopsy details and the subsequent crime scene reports are intensely graphic, but they provide the essential data points for understanding his behavioral signature.
We have to talk about what the medical examiner found.
We do. The forensic pathologist determined that the primary cause of death was catastrophic blunt force trauma to the skull. These injuries were inflicted with a heavy, dense object, which is entirely consistent with the mechanics of the crowbar or the tire iron found in the Beatles' murder kit.
The sheer kinetic force used in this attack is hard to comprehend.
It wasn't just a glancing blow.
No, the autopsy report specifically notes that the cranium was splintered. This isn't a scenario where someone is struck simply to render them unconscious.
Right.
This is the application of massive physical violence fueled by immense rage. Or, conversely, a cold, calculated need to guarantee absolute immediate incapacitation.
He wanted to neutralize any possibility of a struggle, screaming, or resistance instantly.
But the pathology goes much deeper than the initial blunt force trauma.
It does. The medical examiner also documented sharp force injuries on the body. Several knife wounds were recorded.
What do the patterns suggest?
Based on the patterning, these suggest he utilized a blade either as a secondary tool of physical torture while she was incapacitated, or as a mechanism to further desecrate the remains after the initial bludgeoning had caused death.
Which brings us to the sexual desecration.
Right.
Forensic evidence at the scene and during the autopsy confirmed that Karen Campbell had been raped. But the postmortem examination revealed an even darker psychological reality.
The physical evidence suggested that the sexual assault likely continued after she was deceased.
Which is just, it's sickening.
It is a paramount behavioral marker for this specific offender. It points to a rapidly escalating necrophilia. For this type of predator, the act of murder is not always the primary goal.
Right.
Sometimes the murder is merely the prerequisite to achieve the ultimate objective, which is complete, unyielding, absolute possession of the victim.
Because a living person fights back.
Precisely. A living human being has agency. They can resist, they can judge, they can fight back. A deceased victim cannot. The post-mortem assault is the ultimate expression of control and objectification.
That is just terrifying to think about. But because her body was deposited in that snowbank, and because the extreme cold preserved the biological evidence, investigators secured what would eventually become a forensic smoking gun.
The trace evidence.
Yes. During the processing of Karen Campbell's remains, crime scene technicians meticulously collected trace evidence, including several hair samples found on her body.
And at the time, they had no idea who they belonged to.
Exactly. In early 1975, they didn't know whose hairs those were. But fast forward over a year later, when FBI technicians finally seized that 1968 VW Beetle and physically dismantled the interior, they found microscopic hairs trapped behind the back seat.
This is where we have to appreciate the forensic science of the era. DNA profiling did not exist.
This is all visual comparison, right?
Yes, they relied on microscopic hair comparison. A forensic analyst would take the hair found on the victim, place it under a comparison microscope next to the hair found in the car, and examine the medulla, the cortex, the cuticle, and the pigmentation patterns.
And what did they find?
When they did this, they concluded that the hairs from the beetle were microscopically identical to the hairs recovered from Karen Campbell's body.
Wow.
That tiny, almost invisible physical link is what eventually gave prosecutors the foundation to formally charge him with her murder.
The relatively quick discovery of Karen Campbell's body. I mean, just over a month after she vanished, it exposed a flaw in his methodology.
He realized his current disposal method wasn't good enough.
Right. He realized the cold and a snowbank just 3 miles away weren't enough to permanently hide his crimes. He needed geographical vastness. This tactical shift, this need for total erasure, drove him to adapt.
It is a classic example of an organized offender learning from the environment. The quick discovery threatened his sense of invulnerability.
He didn't want to be found out.
Exactly. He recognized that he needed significantly more distance from the abduction site, and he needed a disposal method that would guarantee the victims remain hidden.
To fuel that psychological need we talked about.
Primarily to fuel a deeply disturbing psychological need that dictates his next moves.
And that tactical evolution takes us to the spring. March 15, 1975, we were in another premier Colorado ski town, Vail.
The target this time is Julie Lyle Cunningham. She is 26 years old, working part-time as a ski instructor and a sporting goods clerk.
It is the evening, and she is walking from her apartment in the Apollo Park neighborhood toward a local tavern to meet some friends.
A very normal night out.
Yeah, and the missing person profiles give us a very clear visual of her that night. She was wearing a brown suede jacket, blue jeans, and boots.
The abduction of Julie Cunningham provides us with a terrifyingly clear look at his operational methodology.
Because he actually talked about this one later, right?
He did. Specifically because he later confessed to the exact mechanics of how he intercepted her. He didn't just ambush her from the shadows.
He used a trick.
He utilized a highly practiced ruse. It was a psychological trap he had honed back in the Pacific Northwest.
The fake injury?
Yes. He approached her on the street wearing a fake cast or utilizing crutches, with his arm possibly supported in a sling. He played the part of a struggling injured skier and politely asked for her help carrying his heavy ski boots to his car.
Let's analyze why this tactic is so devastatingly effective. If you are walking down the street in Vail, an injured skier fumbling with their gear is quite literally the most normal, expected sight in the world.
It belongs there.
It perfectly blends into the environment. He is specifically weaponizing her altruism. He is banking on the social conditioning that dictates a decent person, seeing someone visibly struggling on crutches, will instinctively let their guard down and say, oh, let me help you with that.
He used her own basic human decency as the bait.
It circumvents all of our natural threat detection systems.
Once he manipulated her into carrying the gear and walking all the way back to the passenger side of the Volkswagen, the facade instantly evaporated.
The trap is sprung.
The crutches were discarded. He struck her, likely with the tire iron or the crowbar, knocking her unconscious, restrained her with the handcuffs from his kit, and shoved her into that modified passenger floor well, completely out of sight.
And here is where the sheer, terrifying audacity of his escalating methodology becomes apparent. Because he doesn't drive 3 miles down a dirt road this time.
Not at all.
He gets behind the wheel and drives west from Vail, out of the ski corridors, pushing deep into the mountains, heading toward a desolate, high desert area north of a town called Rifle in Garfield County.
The logistics of this transport phase are harrowing. He is driving approximately 80 miles.
80 miles.
That is well over an hour of driving through winding, treacherous mountain passes in the dark, with a dying or unconscious victim bleeding on the floorboards of his vehicle.
Just imagine the pathological confidence required to execute that drive. If he gets pulled over by a state trooper for a burnt-out taillight, if he hits a patch of black ice and slides the Beetle into a ditch, well, his entire double life is over in an instant.
The risk is astronomical.
But he makes the drive. Once he reaches this remote, high-desert site near Rifle, he assaults and strangles her, and then buries her in a shallow grave.
And he remembered the site perfectly.
Yeah, in his death row confessions over a decade later, he described the specific topography of the location with an eerie photographic recall. He remembered a circular drive and several large trees that stood out starkly against the otherwise barren high-desert landscape.
But the burial is not the end of the narrative for Julie Cunningham.
No, it's really not.
This is where we reach the core psychological pivot of his pathology. In those same late-stage interviews, he confessed to his post-mortem behavior regarding this specific disposal site.
What did he do?
Well, at the time, his primary residence was still in Salt Lake City, Utah, but he admitted to making multiple return trips back to the rifle dump site.
The logistics of these return trips are almost impossible to process for a rational mind. Let's do the math based on the geographical data.
It's staggering.
His origin point is the Avenues district in Salt Lake City. His destination is the high desert north of Rifle, Colorado. That is approximately 300 miles one way.
Which means a 600-mile round trip.
600 miles. Think about driving 600 miles today on modern paved interstates in a comfortable modern car with GPS. It is an exhausting day of travel.
It takes it out of you.
Now put yourself in the reality of 1975. You are driving a lightweight 1968 VW Beetle through the treacherous Utah and Colorado mountain wilderness. You're doing it almost entirely in the dead of night to avoid detection.
We're talking 10 to 12 hours of grueling, continuous driving.
And we are forced to ask, what is the psychological imperative that drives this immense expenditure of time, energy, and risk?
Why undertake such a grueling journey multiple times?
Exposing himself to potential traffic stops or accidents.
He confessed that the sole purpose of these trips was to engage in post-mortem sex acts and corpse mutilation. He was driving 10 to 12 hours round trip just to commune, as he chillingly phrased it, with the remains.
I have to bring up an analogy here because it is the only way my brain can make sense of this behavior.
Go ahead.
In basic human logic, and certainly in criminology, most criminals want to put as much physical and psychological distance between themselves and the crime scene as humanly possible.
It is a primal survival instinct.
Committing a murder is like touching a red-hot stove. Your immediate, overwhelming biological reflex is to pull your hand away and run.
Get away from the danger.
But this predator, he touches the hot stove, and then he willingly drives 600 miles through the frozen mountains just to touch the hot stove again and again. What does this level of obsessive commitment reveal about his internal wiring?
It reveals a pathology that transcends the simple act of taking a human life. It speaks directly to the concept of the victim as a permanent own possession.
They aren't people to him anymore.
No, in his fractured psychology, Julie Cunningham ceased to be a human being and became an object that belonged to him. The shallow grave wasn't a final resting place.
It was a storage facility.
Exactly. A storage facility for his property. Furthermore, his willingness to make these grueling drives across state lines demonstrates a staggering sense of what profilers call geographic invincibility.
Like he owned the map.
He genuinely believed that the vastness of the American West was his personal playground, that he could move through these spaces completely undetected, elevated above the laws of nature and the jurisdiction of police.
And tragically, regarding the geographic reality of the American West, he was partly right.
He was?
Despite his incredibly detailed photographic descriptions of the circular drive and the large trees, when forensic search teams went out in 1989 to try and locate the site based on his confessions, they couldn't find Julie Cunningham's remains.
The environment had reclaimed the site.
Yeah, by the time searchers finally reached the area 14 years later, the brutal reality of the high desert environment, the wind erosion, the harsh weather cycles, the animals scavenging it, had completely erased the physical site. She is still out there in the desert.
Which brings us to April of 1975. The attacks are now reaching a fever pitch. He is highly active, covering vast swaths of the state of Colorado in a frenzy of predation, and his disposal methods are about to evolve once more.
Because the shallow grave in the desert wasn't enough.
No. He is seeking a method that guarantees total, immediate physical erasure.
It is April 6th, 1975, in the city of Grand Junction, Colorado, located in the western part of the state near the Utah border. This is the interception of 24-year-old Denise Lynn Oliverson.
Let's focus on Denise.
I want to make sure we hold a vivid picture of Denise in our minds. The missing person bulletins from the time are highly specific. She was 5'4", 105 pounds, with long brown hair and blue eyes.
And her clothing was very distinct.
On the day she vanished, she was wearing a green long-sleeved Indian print blouse, dark Levi's, and she had a distinct silver band ring on her right little finger.
The timeline of that day indicates that Denise had been in an argument with her husband. Seeking some space, she decided to go for a bike ride from her home at 1619 Levada Street to visit her parents. It is a very common, healthy coping mechanism. Just taking a ride to clear your head and cool down.
But she never arrives at her parents' house.
No.
The next day, when a search party is mobilized, they find her bicycle and her sandals. And the location where they find them is critical to understanding the attack.
The bridge.
They're abandoned under the 5th Street Bridge, a large structure that locals refer to as the viaduct. It is a shadowy area near the railroad tracks, right next to the Colorado River.
When forensic behavioral analysts review the scene beneath that bridge, it tells a clear story of a remarkably swift, highly tactical interception.
An ambush.
Yes. The area under the viaduct is shadowed and, crucially, out of the direct line of sight of the busy main road above, U.S. Route 50. He likely spotted her riding, maneuvered his Beetle into the concealed area beneath the bridge, and waited in ambush.
And when she rode past?
The strike was instantaneous and overwhelming.
And when we examined his evolution in concealing the evidence of his crimes, the Denise Oliverson case represents a major calculated shift.
A very dark shift.
In those same 1989 death row interviews, just days before his execution, He admitted to a significant deviation in his methodology here. He didn't use a snowbank, as he did with Karen Campbell.
No.
He didn't spend the time and physical effort to dig a shallow desert grave, as he did with Julie Cunningham. What did he do?
He took Denise Oliverson's unburied body and threw it directly into the churning waters of the Colorado River, approximately 5 miles west of Grand Junction.
Just tossed her in.
It was a cold, highly tactical environmental choice. He recognized the destructive power of the natural hydrology.
Currents.
By utilizing the river's fast-moving currents, particularly during the spring runoff when the water levels are high and turbulent,
Right.
he ensured the body would be rapidly submerged and carried miles away from the abduction site.
That's horrifying.
He essentially weaponized the river to erase the crime scene, knowing that by the time a search was organized and the river was dragged, the physical evidence would be irrevocably lost.
And his grim calculation was correct. Her remains, much like Julie Cunningham's, were never recovered.
Never found.
But what makes this period truly terrifying is that Denise Oliverson was not an isolated incident that spring. The investigative timelines show that by April 1975, his spree was widening at an alarming, almost unsustainable rate.
He was moving so fast.
Investigators have long suspected his direct involvement in several other disappearances during this frantic peak of activity.
Yes, the multi-agency investigation logs note the tragic death of a teenager named Susie Cooley, whose body was discovered in Coal Creek Canyon that same month.
Then there was another one.
Furthermore, there is the case of Shelley Robertson, whose remains were found deep inside a mine at Berthoud Pass.
And how do we tie him to these vast, disparate areas of the state? It comes down to the banality of a paper trail.
Gas receipts.
Exactly. Investigators combing through his records found credit card receipts for gasoline that placed him exactly in the areas where these girls vanished, on the exact dates they vanished.
The geography matches perfectly.
He was traversing the entire state of Colorado, from Grand Junction in the far west to the Front Range in the east, all within a matter of weeks. The sheer mileage he was putting on that Beetle, the constant crossing of mountain passes, is astounding. He is in an absolute frenzy of predation.
But this frantic pace, this escalating operational tempo fueled by a feeling of absolute invincibility, is almost always the exact mechanism that leads to an organized predator's downfall.
They get sloppy.
They begin to believe their own myth. They believe they are genuinely invisible, and they start making sloppy, arrogant mistakes.
Which perfectly transitions us to the after phase of the 1975 spree. We have to look at the reality of his capture and ask, how does a predator who operates across hundreds of miles of rugged, unmonitored wilderness, who uses rushing rivers and remote deserts to hide his victims, who constantly crosses state lines to baffle jurisdictions, how does he finally get caught?
You would think it would be dramatic.
You would think it would take a brilliant FBI sting operation or a massive, coordinated masterstroke of detective work. But no, it comes down to the most mundane, everyday occurrence imaginable.
A simple, routine traffic stop.
August 15th, 1975. We are back across the border in Utah. Officer Bob Hayward of the Utah Highway Patrol is on routine night patrol.
Just doing his job.
Just driving his route.
Yeah.
He notices a tan Volkswagen Beetle driving suspiciously in a residential area. The driving is erratic, the vehicle appears to be loitering, and Officer Hayward makes the routine, yet historically monumental decision to flip on his lights and pull the car over.
It is the exact moment the entire house of cards begins to collapse.
Officer Hayward approaches the vehicle. He asks the driver for his license, and he asks to look inside the car. And what does he find sitting in plain sight?
The kit.
The very murder kit we dissected earlier. Sitting right there in the passenger area are the handcuffs, the ice pick, the crowbar, the ski mask, the pantyhose mask with the eye holes cut out.
For a trained patrol officer, discovering that combination of items during a late-night traffic stop raised massive, immediate red flags.
Oh, absolutely.
It was enough probable cause to lead to his initial arrest for possession of burglary tools.
And the killer realized instantly that his greatest tool, the vehicle itself, was now his biggest liability.
He knew the police had seen the interior.
Right. After he managed to get bailed out on the initial minor charges, he attempted a frantic, desperate forensic scrubbing of the car. He thoroughly washed it, vacuumed the interior, and then quickly sold the Beetle to a teenager in Sandy, Utah, hoping to permanently sever his connection to the physical evidence.
But the authorities were finally starting to talk to each other and connect the dots. In October of 1975, investigators tracked down the teenager in Sandy, legally seized the Beetle, and initiated a total forensic dismantling of the vehicle. And this is where the science of 1975 finally catches up. with his arrogance.
They tore that car apart.
It was a total catastrophic forensic collapse for the killer. When the crime scene technicians physically tore out the seats, lifted the carpets, and dismantled the interior panels, they found microscopic evidence that he couldn't simply wash away with a sponge.
The hairs.
Behind the back seat, trapped in the crevices, they found hair samples. And as we discussed earlier, when placed under a comparison microscope, these hairs were matched to Karen Campbell.
And others, right.
Yes, as well as to 2 other potential victims from Utah.
And it wasn't just hair. The forensic team found serological evidence. They found blood pooled deep under a door panel, tying the interior of that car directly to violent trauma.
The car was a crime scene.
And arguably, the most damning evidence of all was documentary. They found receipts, maps, and motel notes shoved into the glove box and under the seats that placed him precisely at the disappearance sites of the women in both Colorado and Utah.
The sheer volume of physical and documentary evidence was overwhelming, and crucially, it finally forced the disparate law enforcement agencies to break down their silos.
They had to share notes.
In November 1976, over 30 investigators from various jurisdictions across the West met in Aspen, Colorado. They laid all their case files, their teletypes, their timelines, and their evidence on a massive table.
Wow, a real summit.
This summit was a watershed moment in the history of American policing. By synthesizing their data, they concluded definitively that he was responsible for the entire string of Colorado murders.
Which led to his extradition.
Yes. This unprecedented multi-state cooperation led directly to his extradition to Colorado in early 1977 to stand trial for the murder of Karen Campbell, simply because her case, with the body recovered in the hair match, had the most robust physical evidence.
You would think that is the natural end of the story. The predator is in a secure cell awaiting trial. The system worked.
But it's not the end.
No. This is where the narrative takes a final, incredibly infuriating turn into the disruption of justice. Because he didn't just sit quietly in his cell and wait for a jury.
The escapes. And there were 2 of them. They were a testament to his continued manipulation of the legal system, his physical agility, and a staggering amount of systemic negligence on the part of the local authorities.
They just weren't ready for him.
They simply were not equipped or prepared to handle an offender of his psychological sophistication and sheer desperation.
Let's break down the mechanics of escape number 1. It is June of 1977. He is in Pitkin County, Colorado, attending a preliminary hearing at the historic courthouse in Aspen.
And he decides to be his own lawyer.
Right. Because he is a former law student, he aggressively petitions the court to represent himself acting pro se. The judge grants this request, and because he's acting as his own attorney, the judge grants him access to the courthouse's law library during recesses so he can research his defense.
It seems reasonable on the surface.
Sure, until you hear what happened next. The guards lead him into a second-story room, take off his restraints so he can read the books, and they essentially leave him alone.
It was an act of profound, almost incomprehensible underestimation. The authorities viewed him through the lens of his facade.
They just saw a law student.
They saw a clean-cut, articulate law student preparing a legal brief. They didn't see the apex predator. He wasn't researching case law. He was studying the architecture of the window.
And when the guards stepped away,
he opened the window and leaped from the second story, plunging roughly 25 feet to the ground below.
That's a huge drop.
It is. In the process of the fall, he badly sprained his right ankle, but the massive surge of adrenaline masked the pain. He managed to scramble up and flee into the surrounding Aspen Mountains.
With a badly sprained ankle, wearing standard civilian clothes in the rugged Rockies, he manages to evade a massive coordinated manhunt for 6 full days.
Out in the...
Yeah, according to the timelines, he survived the elements by breaking into an empty, secluded hunting cabin, stealing food, a rifle and winter clothing, and hiding out.
But the elements took their toll.
They did. The harsh wilderness eventually broke his physical endurance down. Exhausted, freezing, and in severe pain, he stole a car and attempted to drive back toward the city limits, which is when he was finally spotted by a deputy and recaptured.
Following that massive public embarrassment, the Colorado authorities realized that the Pitkin County facilities were woefully inadequate.
Obviously.
They needed a much more secure facility, so he was transferred to the Garfield County Jail in Glenwood Springs.
No.
But the moment he arrived in his new cell, he immediately began engineering his second escape.
And this one was highly methodical.
Very.
December 1977, escape number 2. The mechanics of this sound like they were pulled directly from a Hollywood prison break thriller, but it is tragically real.
He started by altering his body.
Over the course of several weeks, he intentionally starves himself. He sheds a significant amount of body weight, becoming visibly emaciated. Inside his cell, there is a square ceiling light fixture. He somehow manages to acquire a hacksaw blade.
The historical sources differ on exactly how. Some suggest it was smuggled in by a sympathetic visitor, others suggest he found it left behind by maintenance.
Regardless, he has it, and he spends his night standing on his bed, slowly, quietly sawing through the metal housing and the welds of the light fixture.
He is patient. He saws a little bit each night, using toothpaste or soap to hide the cut marks during the day. He is waiting for the perfect distraction.
And he finds that distraction on New Year's Eve.
While the jail staff is distracted by the holiday, running skeleton crews and dealing with a jail full of drunk drivers, he makes his move. He removed the loosened light fixture, hoists his emaciated, starved body up through the small opening, and squeezes into the dark, incredibly tight ventilation ductwork above the ceiling.
He literally crawls through the ductwork of the jail. He navigates through the dust, the darkness, and the sharp metal, blindly feeling his way forward until he eventually finds a weak point in the ceiling.
And he drops down.
He kicks it out and drops down. But he doesn't drop outside. He drops directly into a closet in an apartment that is located directly above the jail.
And you won't believe whose apartment it was.
An apartment that, incredibly, served as the living quarters for the chief jailer.
He waits in silence until he is certain the apartment is entirely empty. He then calmly rummages through the jailer's closet, takes a set of civilian clothes to replace his prison uniform, puts them on, and then literally walks out the front door of the building, stepping out into the freezing New Year's Eve night as a completely free man.
And the timeline of his flight is absolutely infuriating when you realize the systemic failures. Because it was a holiday weekend, and because he had arranged books under his blanket to look like a sleeping body, the guards didn't check his cell properly during their rounds.
They missed it completely.
They didn't notice he was missing for 17 hours.
17 hours.
By the time the guards realized the cell was empty and the alarms finally rang in Glenwood Springs, he was long, long gone. He hitchhiked from Glenwood Springs back east to Vail. From Vail, he got a bus down the mountain into Denver. From Denver, he boarded a commercial flight to Chicago. He vanished into the sky. He never returned to the state of Colorado.
And we know, tragically, from the historical record that this second escape from Colorado allowed him to eventually make his way to Florida, where his spree culminated in unimaginable, chaotic violence before his final permanent capture.
So when we step back and look at this entirety of this narrative, what does this all mean? When we synthesize the stack of documents we've analyzed today, the autopsy reports, the vehicle schematics, the cross-country timelines, how do we evaluate the dark legacy of the 1975 Colorado spree?
If we synthesize this material objectively, we see that 1975 was the absolute zenith of his organized phase. He was functioning at the very height of his predatory abilities, utilizing geography, psychological manipulation, and vehicular modification to devastating effect.
He was terrifyingly good at it.
But paradoxically, the sheer horror and scale of this spree became a brutal, necessary catalyst for systemic change. It violently forced American law enforcement to wake up.
It showed them how broken the system was.
It demonstrated the fatal flaws of siloed police departments relying on teletypes. The investigation into the tragic deaths of Karen Campbell, Julie Cunningham, and Denise Oliverson directly accelerated the modernization of policing, the absolute necessity of coordinating databases across state lines, and the urgent need for the FBI to develop formal behavioral profiling to understand the psychology of serial crime.
It is an incredibly heavy realization. I want you to really think about what we've covered today. Think about how easily the vast, breathtaking, beautiful landscapes of the Colorado Rockies were weaponized.
A perfect trap.
These were environments built on leisure, vacation, and trust. And they were used as hunting grounds against innocent women whose only mistake was walking alone from a brightly lit hotel lounge to their room or trying to help an injured skier carry his boots. It completely shatters the illusion of safety.
It truly does.
But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought. Something entirely different to mull over when you consider the history we just discussed. We spent the last chunk of time detailing how this apex predator utilized the vast, unmonitored spaces of the 1970s American West.
He relied on the darkness.
He relied on the darkness, the lack of communication, and the anonymity of the open road. Now look at the world you live in today. Think about the technological net that surrounds us. Ubiquitous CCTV cameras on every street corner. automated license plate readers on the highways, cell phone towers tracking your exact geographic location every second of the day, ring cameras on every front porch, digital footprint tracking, rapid DNA
It's
databases.
a completely different landscape.
The question is this: did the evolution of modern technology render the apex mobile serial killer of the 1970s virtually extinct? Could a predator utilizing this exact same methodology, driving hundreds of miles, crossing state lines, relying on a modified vehicle, even survive for a week in today's surveillance state without leaving an undeniable digital trail? Or, more terrifyingly, have the predators simply adapted to the new technology, finding new digital blind spots that we haven't even recognized yet? Think about that.